Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Indigenous People Celebration Day. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. As we gather today, let us take a moment to acknowledge the history of this land we call Brookline. This is the unceded land of the Massachusetts people whose traditions, language, and stewardship continue today through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapog. Today, we are living on the land that was taken by force. By 1641, the colonists in Brookline had allocated to themselves almost all land that had been inhabited by Indigenous people. Land was not the only form of theft that occurred. Lives were also stolen. Historical records state that in 1675, during King Philip's War, 7 Indigenous men were sold into slavery in the Caribbean by residents of the area that we now call Brookline. The 7 men represent part of the early slave trade. Slavery in Brookline continued and grew, but soon those enslaved were African or of African descent. By 1746, enslavers claimed ownership of over half of all Brookline land. We acknowledge the theft of land, culture, and lives, and the ensuring enslavement of Indigenous and African people that occurred here. These early policies set the stage for centuries of systemic racism. As we remember these atrocities, town meeting members and the larger town must commit ourselves to address the ongoing inequities that are the result of our history of colonialism and racism. Although we, as individuals, were not perpetrators of these atrocities, we benefit from these systems. Thus, we dedicate ourselves to addressing them today. I'd now like to share with you a poem that I wrote in the theme of our celebration today. And of course, I just realized I forgot to say who I was. My name is Felina Silver, and I am the chair of the Indigenous People Celebration Committee. Thank you for being here again. And my poem is called Steps from My Past Lead Me into My Present and Guide Me into the Future. Barefoot, I feel Mother Earth below me. I wander through the mountaintops with blades of grass tickling my feet. My thoughts are on where I came from and who I am. There are so many unanswered questions, but I will ask until every one of them has been answered. Cherokee mother, mixed Blackfoot father, 34.2% European, Irish, Scottish, and German. What a mix. What am I to do with that? How do I decide who and what to be? Trying to learn all I can. I feed questions to the internet search engine and get answers. So much information turns my head all around. Blood results do not define me. I am learning all I can and will become what I know. What I'm now owning bits and pieces of the past and weaving them into my future. I hope not to lose who I am for what I hope to become. Mama, thank you for protecting me in the way you were not. I felt no harsh words from man's ignorance. I did not bear witness to any of the atrocities of our people. I was not tasked with the chores and hard labor many of our predecessors had to bear. I am grateful to my life as I live it today, as a free citizen with the freedom of choice and the right to vote. Without your many sacrifices, I would not have this good fortune at my feet. One day, I know I shall return to the earth and feed the plants that will feed my children, their children, and their children to come. Mother Earth, thank you for the home that protects me, my family, and their children. Barefoot, I feel Mother Earth. I wander through the mountaintops with blades of grass tickling my feet. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Crystal Johnson. She's going to welcome us with her son.
Greetings, everybody. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, is this a lot better? Excellent. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Crystal Johnson. This is my son.
Aspen Johnson.
And on this Indigenous Day here in Brookline, which has so many layers of feelings and hopes and understandings, we offer a heart chant. As someone who is Black Indigenous, I recognize it through my mother's side. Even both sides of my parents have Indigenous blood, but it's matriarchal. And so I recognize it specifically through my mother's side, and that can be Tasalgi as well as Menhaden. And we're going to do a heart chant, which is a heart vibration chant. Not many people know about different modalities, but Indigenous traditions have a real powerful, holistic understanding of the energies in the body, like many ancient traditions have. And this is one of the many 8 parts, and it's around the heart. And offer it here because it's a great way to honor Indigenous Day here in Brookline with remembering, recalling the Indigenous ones and what we carry through us. And to heal any of the trauma of what's happening here on the land, or even with ourselves, or any with all. So really offer it in light and love to everybody as just a healing light that, if you can imagine, we all have a spark of energy, whether you're aware of not, and it's all connecting, and may this help further align it and such. So in honor of, I'm going to say, she who's the creative force of life, of the Indigenous traditions, the sacred mother, the sacred feminine that is always recognized, we give this chant. Teshnaena, Teshnaena, Anikokone, Anikone, Teshna, ha ha, Teshnaena, Teshnaena, Anikokone, Anikone, Teshna, ha ha. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Sio, Dagwada'a Hia, Kailey. Hello, my name is Kailey, and I am a member of the Brookline Indigenous People Celebration Committee and an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, which has its capital in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I am originally from Tulsa, and I moved to Brookline after graduating college. Thank you so much for attending Brookline's Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. This year, we're examining an Indigenous past, an Indigenous present, and an Indigenous future, featuring 3 speakers on each of those themes. I will speak on an Indigenous past, and soon you will hear from Dr. Asa Sevelius, Roland Hayes School Principal, for a conversation on an Indigenous present, and Kristen Wyman, co-founder of Eastern Woodlands Rematriation, on an Indigenous future. This speech is dedicated to my great-grandmother, who taught me to be a fearless and strong Cherokee woman. My grandmother lived to be 92 years old and was born in 1923, 1 year before the Indian Citizenship Act. Now, forgive the frankness, but we're going to learn some history today, and history that is not particularly explored in your school's history classroom. June 2nd, 2024 marked the 100th year anniversary of the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. This act granted citizenship to all Native Americans born within the United States. In 1924, this was progress, because in 1884, the Supreme Court ruled in Elk v. Wilkins that Native Americans were not citizens by birth, despite the 1868 adoption of the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship to anyone born in the United States. However, Native Americans still did not have the right to vote in all states because states determined voting rights access. The right to vote was not guaranteed until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. At the time of passage, the Indian Citizenship Act was controversial amongst Native peoples and is complicated legislation when considering the broader context of Native rights and sovereignty in the 19th and 20th centuries. As one scholar explains, the government thought, generally, if they substituted U.S. citizenship for tribal citizenship, then they could terminate tribes. By and large, citizenship was not given out of goodwill, and the tribes knew it. But let's talk a little bit more about the policies of the 19th century United States and how those drove native land dispossession and forced Indian assimilation. On February 8, 1887, Congress passed the Dawes Act, which was named for its author, Senator Henry Dawes of Massachusetts. Don't get too excited. He had nice intentions, but this was the worst thing ever for tribes. Also known as the General Allotment Act, the law authorized the president to break up reservation land, which was held in common by members of a tribe, into smaller allotments to then be parceled out to individuals. My family still has original allotment land in Oklahoma. Thus, Native Americans were registered on a tribal roll and then were granted allotments of their reservation land. The goal of the allotment era was to break up reservations and to ultimately gain access to that land. The allotment era reduced the amount of land owned by tribes. In 1887, tribes held around 138 million acres. 47 years later, in 1934, they owned 48 million acres. The allotment era ended with the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, which was an effort to reverse some of these assimilation policies. However, the damage was done, and it took decades to repair, and this repair is still ongoing. While the U.S. government and state governments were seeking ways to steal native land, one of the ugliest chapters in American history was also taking place simultaneously. Richard Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Boarding School, believed that forced assimilation was the only path forward for Native people. He is known for his motto, "Kill the Indian to save the man." Children were taken from their homes and communities and forbidden to speak their languages, to use their given names, or to practice their religion and culture. They were physically abused if they disobeyed. Their hair was cut, and they were given new clothing to wear to forcibly assimilate to an Anglo-American culture. Carlisle became the framework for all of the boarding schools across the country. There were over 400 schools that sought to forcibly assimilate Native children. The last school closed at the latter part of the 20th century. A recent report from the Bureau of Indian Affairs documented 973 deaths in these boarding schools, 189 at Carlisle alone. However, this death toll is absolutely much larger than that. This is a very ugly legacy of language and culture loss. Carlisle, along with other boarding schools like it, remains a part of the long history of the United States' attempts to either kill, remove, or assimilate Native Americans. As you now understand, there were some key government policies and legislation that helped. Then I'll wait for the truck. There were some key policies and legislation that helped set up the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act, but this act was rooted in assimilation, not tribal sovereignty. Sure. Can you hear me now? Is this better? Sorry. The final driving force for the Indian Citizenship Act was because of the heroic service of Native American military during World War I. More than 12,000 Native Americans served in the Army in World War I, despite not having U.S. citizenship. As part of their service, many Native Americans of the 142nd Infantry 36th Division became the nation's first code talkers. Code talkers sent messages encrypted in their native languages over radio, telephone, and telegraph lines, which were never broken by Germany. Choctaw soldiers are the most documented group of the World War I code talkers, but the Army used the Cheyenne, Cherokee, Comanche, Ho-Chunk, Osage, and Yankton Sioux languages as well. Many code talkers were in the boarding school system. They grew up in the harshest environment and were punished for speaking their language. As adults, these code talkers found it puzzling that the same government that had tried to take their languages in schools later gave them a critical role speaking their languages in military service. But this military service is what propelled many in the United States government to propose and pass the Indian Citizenship Act. As I said earlier, the Indian Citizenship Act was controversial amongst Native peoples, and I hope now you can see some of the reasons why. Many Native peoples saw Citizenship Act as the final act of colonization. While citizenship was forced upon Native peoples, it also helped reestablish some agency. But how is the United States doing in upholding Native voting rights access 21 days before our next presidential election? There are still challenges to voter access and voter suppression in areas of the country with high percentages of a Native voting bloc. As an example, in 2022, the Spirit Lake Tribe, Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and several voters filed a lawsuit challenging North Dakota's state legislative map as unlawfully diluting the voting rights of Native Americans. In many parts of the United States, Native voters could change the outcomes of elections. Native Americans are poised to sway local, state, and federal elections. They make up key voting blocs in states like Arizona, Alaska, Nevada, Montana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Voting restrictions that target these communities can greatly influence electoral outcomes. We saw this critical impact in the 2020 presidential election. Native voters are the reason that Arizona swung for Biden. We must improve the structural barriers to rural Native voters. We must recognize tribal IDs for voting and also change address requirements for voter registration and mail-in ballots. These are just a couple possible solutions to a systemic problem that does not just impact Native voters. So where does that leave us? While this history is dark and the ramifications are still ongoing, today is a celebration. We are still here. Our tribes are still sovereign. They are led by elected leaders with established constitutions. Our languages and our traditions are being restored and revitalized. I will be able to pass to my own children, as my grandmother passed to me, the same lessons about what it means to be Cherokee. We are still here. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and it's an honor to be here today. My name is Asa Sevelius, and I was asked to speak about the Indigenous present, which, again, is an honor for me. I am the principal of the Roland Hayes School here in the public schools of Brookline. The story I'm about to tell is the story of how we changed our name and then learned a lot more about ourselves and made some smart decisions for our school community that we hope can lead the way throughout Brookline and even in neighboring districts. Many of you have not heard of the Roland Hayes School because you didn't realize that the Heath School in Chestnut Hill has changed its name. We have. It was a public process. It was a pretty long and arduous process, but we did change the name of our school. We're the second school in the public schools of Brookline to do so. The first was the Edward Devotion School, and they changed their name to the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. Why did the Florida Ruffin Ridley School have a name change? It was the same reason that the Heath School had a name change. We both schools learned that the names of the schools were named after people who had enslaved other people in their lifetimes. Edward Devotion was an enslaver, and so was the Heath family. And for us, that could not stand in our community. So once we learned about our school name, we decided to move forward with a public, open process of finding a new school name. We had about 30 unique name candidates for our school. The 4 name candidates that were the finalists, I'll tell you now, were John Wilson, the great artist who was a Brookline resident, Ellen and William Kraft. If you don't know their story, you should look it up. Ruth Batson, who was an activist in Boston and one of the founders of the Metco program. We're a proud Metco partnership school. And finally, Roland Hayes, who we ultimately decided to go with. Roland Hayes. He was a great musician. He lived in Brookline for a long time. If you don't know him, you should definitely look him up. Along the way, we were very fortunate to work with a lot of experts to find out about the names that we were selecting for our new school name. We worked with Dr. Barbara Brown. We worked with a resident, Rob Daves. We worked with John Wilson's children. We worked with an amazing author who wrote this amazing book about Ellen and William Kraft, Ilian Wu. And then we had the opportunity to work with the Brookline Indigenous Peoples Day Celebration Committee members. And that's what I'll be talking about moving on. When we opened the ballots, or we opened the reception for new school name, possibility names, we did again have about 30 unique names for our new school name. Of those 30 unique names, 4 were Indigenous names. Those names were the Quabbin, Sagamore James, Massasoit, and then the Settlement, which actually I want to talk about because it's not an Indigenous name, but it spoke to the location of our school. Our school sits at Ackers and Elliott Street, right in the heart of Chestnut Hill. The Settlement is what the neighborhood had been called for a long time, and still some people use that name, the Settlement. It's because when people were settling in Boston, this was a part of Brookline that was affordable. So a lot of the housekeepers, a lot of Irish settled there. A lot of the police force settled there in my neighborhood, my school's neighborhood. And it was called the Settlement. It was also called the Irish Lace Community because a lot of the windows had the beautiful Irish lace because it was brought over with them from Ireland when they settled here. And so those were the 4 names that were mentioned. Settlement, the Quabbin, Sagamore James, and then Massasoit. We had an adult committee working on finding a new school name, and then we had a kid committee, our student committee. They were the real drivers of the change in the name process. But when we received those 4 Indigenous names, the adults who were on the committee really had a hard time deciding, these are great names. Massasoit's a great name. It would be a real honor. What about the Quabbin? Doesn't the Quabbin feed into this reservoir and all these conversations? What about the Settlement? And so we said, let's talk to experts. And some of the experts we talked to were Kailey, who you just heard from, Paul McLean, who's been a member of the Brookline Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee for a long time, and others who came to speak with us about what would it be like to name our school after an Indigenous person or place. Ultimately, we decided, or the kids decided, because the adults, again, were really wrestling with this idea. Should we not? But the kids decided we would not name our school after an Indigenous person or place. And the reason was that we hadn't been doing that work. And at the same time, simultaneously, we had other agencies in our district changing their names away from Indigenous names. About 11 years ago or so, I think you'll remember the Brookline High School changed their mascot. It was an Indigenous mascot, and they got away with that. And then the Sagamore newspaper, the student newspaper at the high school, they changed their name at the same time we were trying to make this decision. It's now the Cypress. So we would be moving towards an Indigenous name despite having no Indigenous connection. We weren't teaching a robust Indigenous curriculum. We certainly weren't making active ties into the community to bolster any Indigenous curriculum or contact. And so we made a decision that we would be moving away from those options too. And we publicly made a statement that we were dropping those 4 names from the candidates of choice. But what we did learn along the way from people like Paul and Kailey was that We were literally sitting on land that had been occupied by indigenous people. The land was a home for people. The land was a burial ground for people, indigenous people. The land was farming. It was a robust place where people, indigenous people, had raised their families, did their work, and lived their lives for a long time. But right there at where Ackers Street and Elliott Street intersect was exactly where the Ackers family were starting to farm. Settlement was happening. And over time, and because there was a church at the end of the road too, they were being preyed upon literally by white settlers. And so eventually all that was there that was indigenous land, indigenous homestead, was eradicated. Even the bones, we believe, from what I've learned from working with these amazing folks, is that those were moved and disposed of as well. So our school literally occupies native land. So the kids and I, the student committee, and the adult committee who was still helping out, of course, and all of the experts, we thought, what can we do to name that? And so not only were we changing the name of our school, but we really felt it would be a powerful acknowledgement to create our own land acknowledgement. And so that became another parallel process in our school renaming efforts. Our school is a school that serves, we have 4-year-olds, we have a pre-K in our school, we have a BEEP classroom, and we have an up to 8th grade. We're a pre-K through 8th school. So any land acknowledgement that we wrote, we wanted it to be accessible to anybody in the community. We asked ourselves while writing this and continuing to consult with Paul and Kailey, who would this land acknowledgement be for? Can everyone who reads it have an opportunity to understand it? Does it name the past? Does it set a vision for the future? And is the land acknowledgement true? And those were the 4 questions we were asking ourselves along the way as we began to craft our land acknowledgement. Thankfully, we also had an opportunity to consult with Thomas Green. He's a member of the Massachusetts tribe, and he was extremely helpful to me, just simply listening to those 4 questions and helping me go deeper and deeper into understanding the history of the land and the people and what we were looking for. So in the end, we did write our land acknowledgement. And we are the only Brookline school, again, that has a land acknowledgement. We make it public. It's in our signatures, and it's on my website. It's on every time a message is sent, there's our land acknowledgement. And I will read that land acknowledgement to you now. This parcel of land that our school sits upon is a special and sacred place. Before this place was a town, before our school was here, before this neighborhood was called the Settlement or even Chestnut Hill, and before this land was a farm, this land was held by the Massachusetts, the people indigenous to this place. The Massachusetts were the caretakers of this site, living full lives, raising families, and burying their dead right here. We recognize and honor this history and seek to create thoughtful land stewards and citizens for generations to come. As a public school, our primary objective is to ensure access, membership, and participation of all community members in our care. And with this land acknowledgement, we state our willingness to work towards that vision where all feel a true and abiding sense of belonging. And so as I read it now, I go back and I think, who is this for? This is for us. Can everyone understand? I believe they can. Does it name a past and set a vision for a future? I think it does. And is it true? It is true. And it will continue to be true. And again, I hope that our model of recognizing the past and moving into the present with an eye for the future can really help other schools, other students, and other educators to do the same. I thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here today.
Hi, everyone. Greetings. Good day. Natessa Kristen. I am a member of the Hassanamisco tribal nation, and my ancestors are the Thomas Speen line. I was raised in Framingham. My ancestors come from Natick. very close to my homelands. We also have ancestral connections to the Massachusetts people. And yeah, we have existed here for thousands of years. When I think about this land, I think about the riverways, I think about the old pathways, the footways of my ancestors, and I think about our people thriving. You know, really, we are a manifestation of our cosmovisions. So our birth stories, our creations, which really parallel the geological formations of this area. As a Nipmuc person, I'm a freshwater person. Literally, it is us and we are it. And I'm born into this network of riverways and land base. And so it's just completely tied to my identity. So I feel at home. I'm really appreciative of the invite to come and speak. Gratitude to all of the previous speakers. And it's really great to hear about the work that's happening to correct history and to adequately represent to the best of our ability where we all are. You know, my lived reality is to feel like I'm living in two different worlds, knowing deeply that this isn't very much an Indian place, knowing intimately my ancestors, my family lines, and that they are tied to this place. But then also walking these pathways that have our names all over the place, but still being very much invisibilized. And so just appreciate the way this land has been cared for all these years, and for all of you in making the choice to be out here today, to come and to listen to these stories and to be part of change and part of that trajectory. That's what I'm going to talk a bit about today. So yeah, I really appreciate the thematic areas of this talk and thinking about the past, the present, and the future. I get to talk about the future, which I'm super excited about. You all are all part of that story, but we can't know the future that we need without going back to the past. And that's why I bring up the cosmovisions in our origin stories, because all of our struggles today are to continue those dreams that our ancestors had about the way the world would be for all of us, not just human beings, but our non-human kin as well. And everything that we do today is to live up to those dreams. And all of our struggles are intertwined with those visions that our ancestors once had. And it's very bright. It's a bright future. So let's acknowledge the past and the history, and let's understand our context today and what we need to do today, and that we are change makers, that we have power. We have this awareness. All of you are here today because you're acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day, and that we're very much still here and you're a part of this place. And so we all have a choice in how we want to proceed, right? And when we're talking about Indigenous futures, I get so excited because there's a world of possibility, right? And because we're acknowledging this and we're willing to change the trajectory in a really good way, there's a lot of power in that. And so, you know, my ask is for you to remember that and continue to be these change agents, continue to tell the story, continue to push back. I love hearing that it was the kids that were really the ones that were, you know, pushing the name change and pushing the future. And that is what Indigenous futures are, right? It's acknowledging that you're all part of this story and that you have power to change it. I recently heard somebody ask, like, what would it mean to live with love more than we live with fear? And I think everything that took place here that was negative and harmful and violent was really a manifestation of fear. And so Indigenous futures means living with love over living with fear. You know, what does that mean? That means, you know, dismantling patriarchy, right? I think patriarchy is something that conditions us to believe in a scarcity mindset and a power over, and that's just not an Indigenous way. So if we're doing land acknowledgements, if we're saying we want to be change agents, that's acknowledging that patriarchy and dominance and power over other beings is not Indigenous. An Indigenous value is to respect that we all come to this world with gifts and we all have a role in that, and that we see each other, and that whatever we do, it's from a care and abundance mentality, in a way to take care of our human and non-human kin, in a way to take care of our land, our riverways, and understanding, just like I said, when I'm Nipmuc, I'm saying I'm a part of it and it's a part of me. When my non-human kin are thriving, when our riverways are thriving, we will thrive. If they're not thriving, if they're not well, we are not well. And so we have to work each day to make those corrections, to heal. Indigenous futures also means care, right? It means matriarchy, right? It means the nurturing that we all need, the land needs, we need. And so that's my invitation to you as well, to come from a place of love. Indigenous futures means an end to imperialism. Imperialism is completely tied and intertwined with patriarchy and dominance, and we see today what imperialism is doing. It's, pushing climate change, and that's just a matter of fact. We are not going to be able to get out of that, and we all have a role in ending that trajectory. It's literally repeating what has occurred here on this ground. As long as we are living and thriving in a world that pushes militarization, imperialism, and dominance and patriarchy, we are going to continue to destroy our riverways, our food and farm, our medicines, everything that we need to be well. So we all have a role in ending that trajectory, and like I said, coming from a mindset where we're caring for each other. Indigenous futures means land back. What does land back mean? It's very different depending on the tribal nations that you're talking to and the people that you're interacting with. And from my point of view, land back means literally allowing us to lead and have autonomy in our traditional homelands. So if you are an owner of a parcel, if you are working in a municipality, state government, federal employee, the role is to continue to acknowledge that the land has been taken through force, through violence, and that we need to change that trajectory by giving it back. Does that mean signing over your deed? Maybe for some people. We see it happen, and it can be a beautiful thing. But it also can take different forms. It could mean giving access to tribal folks so that they can harvest or forage or access a riverway that your property line might be sitting on. It can be being a steward and making sure that the non-human kin that are in your homelands or on your property are able to thrive. We have folks that will harvest things and give it to community. There's lots of different roles that you can play in giving land back. I was part of the advisory council that in South Natick that played the role in contemplating whether or not to remove the dam. I don't understand why we needed a year to figure that out, but we did, and they approved to remove the dam in South Natick, but we have many more to go, the one in Watertown. So my role in that was basically saying when the fish are thriving and they return, then I know that we will be well. And a lot of folks believed that they couldn't return. But we started shifting that narrative. And by the end of that year-long process, people were talking about the fish returning. But we also need those other dams to come down, the dam in Watertown. So that's what land back looks like too. Literally giving rights over to the riverways and the other beings that can't speak for themselves in the language that we understand, and knowing that they need these advocates. Indigenous future is knowing that we aren't the saviors. We have a role here, and it's knowing how to humble ourselves and be caretakers in a way that we give that autonomy and those rights over to the other beings, and be a steward, help facilitate a process where our non-human kin have rights. I don't know really what else to say. I don't know, are we opening it to any questions or? Yeah? Okay. Again, just much appreciation to all of you for being here. You had a choice in how you wanted to spend your holiday or your day off, and you all decided to come here. It's cold and rainy and wet, but hopefully you're feeling the fire burning inside. Let that fire keep burning. We have a lot of work to do, but this is a really good start. And yeah, I'm here for any questions. Yeah. You're welcome.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here with us today. And I'd like to open up our vendor tables as well as the food being served inside. Don't forget to do a raffle ticket for the 2 baskets displayed at our Indigenous Peoples Celebration Day table. We'd love to have some lucky winner for both the baskets. So again, thank you, and please go shop and enjoy. Thanks for being here.